Good morning, everybody. This is a live update on Tropical Storm Eta that made landfall yesterday evening across the northern Florida Keys. Mike Tice was there in position and actually intercepted the middle of the eye, seeing stars clear out right above him. It was actually a very large, cleared out eye, despite it coming in as a tropical storm. And now it continues to spin down as a tropical storm to the southwest of Florida. The minimum pressure is actually down to 992 millibars, but it has not yet intensified into a hurricane just yet. I did want to show you a handful of these videos from Mike last night. This was in that dominant convective band. And this was actually in the upper Florida Keys in the Isla Mirada area. He had to go about 45 minutes to the south to get right into the centroid of the eye. And this was actually a convective band that was coming into the northern Keys last night as this thing made landfall. I've got some radar to show you as well, to show you the exact location of this intercept. Here you can see some more video from the Florida Keys taken by Mike out there. Winds were gusting to about 70, 75 miles an hour out there last night. And this is also in the upper Keys. And there definitely was a storm surge. The National Hurricane Center was predicting about a 2 to 4 foot storm surge. But Mike definitely observed a surge out there, at least a couple of feet deep across the upper Florida Keys. So that was definitely consistent. I do wish that we had the Surgenator sensors deployed out there. Nighttime landfall here. Not too many people without power, though. Thankfully, it didn't intensify too much yesterday. It came in as a tropical storm. And definitely looks like winds gusting over 70 miles an hour there in that convective band. And here is some of that storm surge that Mike was able to observe. Couple of feet deep out there. That's up over the dock right there. Probably about a 2 foot storm surge rise, I would estimate. Here's a little bit more of that surge right along the hotel there in Isla Mirada. See Gizmo going berserk. That must mean the neighbor is awake upstairs. Walking loud all day long, really. There you can see that storm surge, a couple of feet deep coming into the parking lot of in the Florida Keys. This is pretty close to the HERV headquarters there. A lot of times pressure falls have been theorized to lead to babies being born out there. Mike is expecting his first baby with Andrea. And they're awaiting that. Could be any day now. They were thinking it could even happen last night. Mike was pushing Andrea to try to get the first intercept for Jordan to get an early start out there to get right into the centroid. Not sure if he was successful in that push. But there you can see the storm surge coming in. A little bit more video coming up here as well. And again, this was taken by Mike last night. Landfall of Tropical Storm Eta. He measured a pressure down to about 991.9 millibars right in the center of the eye. And he actually saw stars inside the eye as well. I'll show you that photo here. And then we're going to break down the forecast of Eta. We're also going to discuss some new Surgenator data that's become available. And we're going to discuss a marginal threat for severe weather today across the Southern Plains. We were watching that system closely for days leading up to see if it could be a more substantial severe weather event. And here's a shot from Mike Tice inside the eye. There you can see the edge of the eye wall. I guess you could call it an eye wall there. Basically a convective band enclosing the center of the system. And look at these stars coming out inside the eye as that pressure dropped to about 991.9 millibars out there. And you can see the edge of this convective band coming in. That came back in with those 70 mile an hour winds. But a beautiful shot inside the centroid, inside the circulation of Hurricane Eta, coming ashore yesterday evening, just to the north of Isla Mirada out there, the northern Florida Keys. There was also some standing water, some flooding areas like Miami, Fort Lauderdale had a couple feet of water in there, a little bit of a storm surge. But that max surge was observed in the upper Florida Keys, and Mike was all over it out there. So that's the eye photo. Beautiful eye. Sun came out there. Pressure fell to 991.9 millibars. It did not hit as a hurricane, so it did come in as a stout tropical storm. Here you can see that dominant rain band there as well. And I could show you some of the video radar loop showing that landfall yesterday evening as Tropical Storm Eta. And now it's forecasting just to meander to the southwest of Florida. The National Hurricane Center is still showing Eta to reach hurricane strength, minimal hurricane strength, but I would say that the confidence is definitely decreasing right now on the impact of a stout tropical cyclone along the west coast of Florida. In fact, the model spread has increased, some of them showing it just completely dissipating over the cooler waters of the central Gulf of Mexico, even meandering off to the north toward the north central Gulf of Mexico. Of course, we don't need that to happen. Here is the radar loop from last night showing that landfall, and that's that intense convective band that you can see there right on the north side of that very large eye. And the eye did have clearing, so if it was during the day, you would have seen the sun come out. There you can see that convective band hammering the northern Keys, probably with the strongest winds that this tropical storm produced. I would say gusts over 70 miles an hour certainly happened with this storm. And my head right there is right just to the north of that dominant rain band, hammering the northern Keys there, the bridge over to the mainland, Homestead as well. There you can see the flash flood warnings that were issued a little closer to Miami, south side of Miami, including the radar site there, as those dominant bands came in and actually did lead to some street flooding last night, locations like Miami and Fort Lauderdale. You can see that other dominant convective band off to the north. And this is one thing that we saw in the models. We saw a west to east dominant convective band a little further north in the Florida Peninsula. It did settle in through the Miami, Fort Lauderdale area as opposed to further north near West Palm Beach and Jupiter. But those tropical storm warnings extended up well up the east coast of Florida. And there was likely a bit of some surge there in the Everglades on the southwest side of the Florida mainland after Eta passed, and you got those southerly winds piling up the water on the southwest side of the peninsula. That's why there was a storm surge warning that wrapped around the southwest side of the peninsula as well for a 2 to 4 foot storm surge. But this is the radar loop from Radar Omega last night as Mike was experiencing those conditions in that convective band on the north side of a large eye, and that the stars definitely came out. There you can see those stars. You get rid of my annotations there. And again, this was taken by Mike Tice inside the center of Tropical Storm Eta, measuring a minimum pressure down to 991.9 millibars. So he measures the centroid of that eye, intercepting that thing directly. Here is the official National Hurricane Center forecast track. Actually forecast to become a hurricane now by Tuesday afternoon. So by tomorrow afternoon, when it begins to initiate that northward movement and the weakness in that subtropical ridge, the upper level low that dictated that northwest and west turn yesterday, a negatively tilted upper level low that resided through the central Gulf of Mexico, has definitely reached its peak and is basically dying out a little bit. We expect steering currents to become very weak for Eta over the southeastern Gulf of Mexico down here. It's just going to meander for a few days until the middle part of this week. And latest models are actually showing a weaker tropical cyclone out here. Some of the spreads actually take it up towards the central Gulf Coast as a weaker, hardly even recognizable tropical cyclone. There's a lot of cooler water temperatures up here in the northern Gulf and the western Gulf after the record-breaking season that we had up there in the north central Gulf Coast. Those hurricanes upwelling a lot of cooler water, accelerating the seasonal downtrend in sea surface temperatures out here in the northern and western Gulf of Mexico. Down here near the loop current, though, temperatures are still warm, still above 27, 28 degrees C, so still sufficient for some re-intensification. And with this negatively tilted upper level low, kind of wrapping around this tropical cyclone, carving out an environment that's still favorable for intensification. Some of the models, many of the models, are still showing a reinvigoration into a Category 1 hurricane. But this track has become less certain today. This track off to the northeast across northwestern Florida, even though this is what the National Hurricane Center track shows, and it probably is the most likely path for Eta. There is more uncertainty in this path that has developed with the morning model runs, and I'm going to show you that spread amongst the hurricane and the global models. But really, the subtropical ridge is going to continue dominating the mid-Atlantic down through the southeast. A little weakness in that ridge is going to encourage a northeastward turn of Eta, and there definitely is a chance that by the end of the week or towards Saturday, could be a second landfall of Tropical Storm Eta once again. And here you can see again some of that video taken by Mike Tice inside that convective band that we just showed you in the northern Keys, right up against the Florida mainland. That's where the strongest winds were observed. Mike estimated that those winds were gusting over about 70 miles an hour out there, and a little bit stronger than you might think for a Tropical Storm Eta that came in. Almost a hurricane, but didn't quite make it. And here are those hurricane models showing the increased spread across the northern Gulf of Mexico and decreased forecast confidence in that track off to the northeast toward Florida. The hurricane models aren't the only one showing this renewed uncertainty. There's the official track, and in fact, not a single member of the hurricane model shows that exact forecast track. You've got this camp that takes it off toward Tampa, a little bit further to the east, and then with those weaker steering currents and a reinvigoration of that subtropical high across the southeastern U.S., there's another camp out here that takes it off to the west over those cooler waters of the Gulf of Mexico, the northern and western Gulf of Mexico. So these tropical cyclones here are going to be weaker, probably more of a hybrid storm, less of a tropical cyclone out there. These would be slightly stronger off to the northeast, keeping it over the warmer waters of the southeastern Gulf of Mexico, but really a decrease in the certainty with that forecast track, and that is supported by the GFS ensemble models here, really showing a spread all over the place. Stronger cyclones off to the east with that track taking a sharper turn off to the northeast. That's where the warmer water is located. We do expect there to be a stronger tropical cyclones if they do take this track and keep them over the southeastern Gulf of Mexico. But anything out here over those cooler waters, you're getting below 27 degrees Celsius, and definitely a weaker tropical cyclones off into the northern part of the Gulf of Mexico there, which is good news. A couple of these lone tracks further west, just to the north of the Yucatan, are some stronger tropical cyclones down there, keeping it over the warm water of the loop current. Really, though, this is the loop current over here in the southeastern Gulf of Mexico, that warmer water above 27 degrees Celsius, and that's why you've got stronger tropical cyclones for those scenarios further out to the east, keeping it over that warm water. And as I mentioned, we also have new Surgenator data to share with you. We've been working hard over these last few days during this coronavirus scare. Some mild cold symptoms, really, that are starting to already subside. But I've been working hard with Mark to go over and pull off this entire Surgenator data set. So I'm going to show you this data now, and then after that, I'm going to discuss the marginal severe weather threat that could happen today across Kansas, maybe parts of Oklahoma. It's definitely a marginal threat. There is a small chance of an isolated tornado or two, but really this trough ejecting with a positive tilt, not really intensifying upon ejection with that neutral tilt or almost a negative tilt would be more preferable. But first, let me share this Surgenator data. And we deployed across Plaquemine Parish, 2 locations near the Venice, Louisiana area, and another location further north near the Buras, Louisiana area. We believe that the location near Buras sampled a 10 to 15 foot storm surge. But the ones near Venice had this double peak. So this double peak surge, largely a freshwater surge as well, bottoming out in the middle and almost giving you a false sense of security out here in between the 2 peaks. Peaked out at about 6 feet, that storm surge, and then it bottomed out, and then we got a pure Mississippi River surge, and that was from the piling up of that water. The southerly winds piled up the pure fresh water inside the Mississippi River, and then once Hurricane Zeta moved off to the east, that allowed the water piled up into the Mississippi River to flood back out over Plaquemine Parish. And that's one thing different that we saw. The location near Buras actually just had 1 single peak, but the 2 locations in Venice definitely had this well-defined double peak of a storm surge. We had the big one off the Gulf of Mexico. Most of the wave action was actually as that storm surge was on the way up. So this is unprecedented 1 second data here, 1 second storm surge data. That's why you can see this wave action as well. On top of the surge, you can see a smooth line in between, showing that there was a reduction of wave action down here in the Venice area. And there was a little bit of wave action here off the Gulf of Mexico, and that's given that salinity rise. Here is the other plot. This is from Surgenator 4, right outside the Venice Marina. And look at this dramatic rise in the salinity. The salinity is the plot, the third plot from the bottom. This is the salinity curve. And one thing we noticed as we were playing in the storm surge, basically wading around waist deep, we were anticipating that storm surge. We were out walking along the edge of the Gulf of Mexico, and then finally it came in. In a matter of minutes, we had this nonlinear increase in the storm surge flooding, a little bit less in terms of wave action near Venice Marina, as we experienced near Cypress Cove Marina. That was the plot that I just showed you, a little reduction in the wave action as this was coming up. A bit sheltered of an area there on the dock, but definitely we're able to sample that dramatic water rise up to about 6 feet. And again, a pronounced second peak within that storm surge too. And one thing we noticed is just as the water was starting to come down after it reached its peak, that's when we saw this dramatic rise in the salinity up to about 40 parts per thousand. And that's as we were getting Gulf of Mexico water coming in here, different than the location at Cypress Cove, which was a pure freshwater deployment. This one definitely sampled Gulf of Mexico, going up to pure seawater there just after that initial peak in the storm surge, and then coming down a bit as that water went down to a minimum. And interestingly, this secondary surge noted here was seawater. So that went up at brackish water, I would say, but that water went up to about 20 parts per thousand in the secondary rise after the storm surge fell, giving us that false sense of security right there. Had a little bit of a salinity peak, and then it went back down again to pure brackish water, but then an increase in that salinity content there with this secondary peak. That says that salt water was getting packed into the mouth of the Mississippi River from those persistent southerly winds on the east side of Hurricane Zeta, and then that backwash bleeding back out over the storm surge sensor shows that was actually an increase in salinity. So that was seawater that was getting packed up into the Mississippi River, and when it bled back out and we experienced that back surge, that was also associated with an increase in salinity there at that location. And this was the Beerus location, about 20 miles up, just shy of that eye wall, the southern eye wall. So this is why we experienced this peak surge out here. And this was Gulf of Mexico water, as shown by the slow rise in salinity up to about 30 to 40 parts per thousand, especially up here as we got pure salt water. Had some mixing, some brackish water with that big surge, some lower salinity values out here. And salt water is heavier than fresh water, so the salt water collects at the bottom, and so that's why you get more of a freshwater profile before the surge even rises. And then when you get this dramatic rise up to about 10 to 15 feet at the peak with a lot of wave action. This location was on the west side of the levee, so that's how we got pure Gulf of Mexico, powerful surge coming in here. It destroyed a bunch of the docks that we deployed our storm surge camera along. The Surgenator survived and was able to get us this valuable data, and you can see this salinity rise up to about 40 parts per thousand as we had pure mixed Gulf of Mexico in there. Quite a bit of wave action too, even as we recovered the Surgenator sensor. We were getting southwesterly winds on the backside of Hurricane Zeta, accelerated by the approach of that big time trough, that dry air punch on the backside of the system. So we were still getting surge at Johnny's dock there in Beerus, even as we were collecting the Surgenator sensor. And look at this reduction in water temperature as we got more of a stratified profile the day after. You had less mixing with the Gulf of Mexico and had this decrease in water temperature, dramatic decrease in water temperature as the water became stratified. And maybe that's also due to some mixing. Probably the warmer water temperatures were bleeding off first, emptying out back into the Gulf of Mexico, leading these colder water temperatures as the storm surge level continued to decrease and you lost that wave action a bit. I'm just learning, just kind of scratching the surface of being an oceanographer here, so it's definitely not my expertise, but you can definitely see a dramatic decrease in the water temperatures after an increase in the water temperatures initially with that storm surge rise. But this is the biggest storm surge that we measured with the Surgenator sensors. This is Surgenator 2 that was deployed in the Buras area. We still have to apply the suite of atmospheric pressure data that we have to get a final storm surge depth with this. But we do believe that it's between 10 and 15 feet, and that is supported by those water and debris marks that we saw collecting this sensor the day after in Buras there in Plaquemine Parish. So this is some preliminary data. All of this science is made possible by the Facebook supporter community. Please consider checking us out. I've got a link in the text of this live. I'm also going to do a Q&A for supporters only. Right after this live, I'm going to show you some more of the video collected by Mike Tice last night from Tropical Storm Eta, and we'll go over a little bit more of this data, including a discussion of that dramatic water temperature decrease there in the day after collecting the Surgenator sensor. But definitely a successful mission. The data set's looking beautiful. This is 1 second data of storm surge, and we're capable of sending this live. We did lose our cell phone signal out there in Plaquemine Parish as Hurricane Zeta came in. But if we could retain that signal, as we would have along the Mississippi coastline, then we'd be talking about live storm surge data, life-saving storm surge data coming in through the Surgenator network. I'm still hoping to deploy this for the second landfall of Tropical Storm Eta if it comes in along the west coast of Florida. But the confidence is definitely decreasing in the potential for that. So now that we've discussed some of that new Surgenator data, I want to go over the potential, and it's a marginal potential for severe weather today downstream of this trough. And this is basically a positively tilted trough, but it is trying to close off at the base a bit, which is going to increase the chances of severe weather, even though this trough is definitely has a positive tilt to it. This wave is going to weaken as it ejects over this dominant subtropical ridge over the southeastern U.S. You can see what happened with this wave lifting north toward Hudson Bay. This is what brought the blizzard conditions across southern Saskatchewan and Montana. So now we're going to see what this storm system is going to do for severe weather later today across Kansas. And there is a marginal threat. The Eta, or the NAM model, has Eta down here in the southeastern Gulf of Mexico. We used to use the Eta model back in the day. That used to be one of my go-to models for forecasting of severe weather. Based on Eta coordinates, or these, basically, you're trying to resolve the terrain, not using wave-like vertical coordinates, but what are called Eta coordinates, little blocks to block out the mountainous terrain and to resolve vertical resolution in the models. Eta coordinates, it was called. But there you can see the NAM model showing Tropical Storm Eta down there in the southeastern Gulf of Mexico, still over warm water, and that's why it's expected to become a hurricane through the day tomorrow. Sitting out here, that upper level low is basically gone. That vorticity streamer kind of wrapping around this entire enclosed environment of favorable conditions to maintain a tropical cyclone. And it's over the loop current, so temperatures are still above 27 degrees C, so I wouldn't be surprised if it does strengthen up into a hurricane, but I would be surprised if it does take that forecast track up toward northwest Florida. I really think anything's on the table right now, including a weakening or a spinning down of this tropical cyclone over the eastern Gulf of Mexico. Well, let's see what the low-level jet's going to do in front of this closing off system here. You can see that because of the shape of this system having that positive tilt, it leads to a more veered, weaker low-level jet out here, really stretched out. To get a big severe weather event, you really want that backed, due southerly low-level jet banked right up against the initiating boundary, whether it be a cold front or a dry line or a merger of all of those boundaries near a triple point. You really want a backed low-level jet off in the due north-south direction. That's going to lead to the greatest low-level wind shear, the greatest moisture transport up into this environment. I imagine with Tropical Storm Eta down in the eastern Gulf of Mexico, there's likely a reduction in the moisture transport as well into the southern plains. And it's definitely not going to help with that veered out low-level jet out here. And you've got some marginal dew points, around 60 expected to develop by late afternoon, but definitely marginal. If we had a more backed low-level jet, if this upper-level storm system was coming in with a more neutral tilt or even a negative tilt, it would pull this moisture northward through the western Gulf of Mexico, and we'd be talking about a robust severe weather situation, but it's just not going to happen, it looks like, based on my initial glance at this NAM. This is the apparent surface low, a weak surface low across eastern Colorado this evening. Cold front dominating. Big time cold front surging south through the southern plains. You probably do have a diffuse dry line through the Texas Panhandle. And there is a chance that where this cold front merges with the dry line here, and even with those marginal dew points, that you could get the development of some convection. Could produce some marginally severe wind gusts, maybe a little bit of hail, but really not expecting much in the way of severe weather. Looking at a forecast sounding out here, we're probably talking about an inverted V sounding. Really just not enough in the way of instability to generate a surface-based severe weather threat. Let's look at the surface-based CAPE values. Really nothing in the way of surface-based instability out here. So we do have a marginal threat for severe weather, but it's due to elevated convection getting forced up by this front surging south. And there's really nothing in the way of surface-based CAPE. If you look at a mixed layer, nothing there either. I'm kind of surprised that they put the marginal risk out there, because I'm really not seeing much in the way. Looks like maybe some overnight storms developing near the Dodge City area, elevated, forced up by that front, which is blasting south through the southern plains. Here's the front. It's actually going to be about 39 degrees by 10 p.m. this evening in Dodge City as that front's blasting through. But it could force some elevated convection out here, southwestern Kansas into the Oklahoma Panhandle. Definitely not chase-worthy. And the reason why, you got a little capping inversion. Lapse rates, definitely not steep. Definitely some weak lapse rates. If anything, it's statically stable up there. Skinny CAPE, a little bit of elevated instability here, maybe between about 500 and 700 millibars. So you could get some convection forced up over that front that will be surging south. If we look at a sounding on the other side of the cold front, we'll see that frontal inversion. There you can see that steep frontal inversion. But even above that, there's just a really narrow slot of steeper lapse rates that really above about 600 millibars. So you've got some warming up there too. That's going to prevent the development of elevated storms, the lack of elevated instability up there. Warming here at 500 millibars certainly doesn't help. Really a lack of lift at 500 millibars and a monster frontal inversion. Northerlies below it. There is a chance that we could get some convection based above this frontal inversion, but really the chances are almost zero of severe weather happening today across the southern plains. Long range though, Dixie Alley is eventually going to come to life. I'm not sure exactly when that's going to happen. Some discussions with some other storm chasers. We think that maybe after Thanksgiving that could happen. We kind of go into this zonal flow regime through next weekend. We're looking out at Fantasyland now out here. It's possible this could signify a pattern shift, some southwesterly flow coming in to California there toward the middle to later part. So this could be the beginning of a pattern shift coming in around the 17th of November. We'll see if this is enough to break down this persistent subtropical ridge over the southeastern U.S. It's probably not going to be. Usually the atmosphere likes to follow certain patterns, and that's going to be these systems peaking over the Mountain West and then shearing out over top this subtropical ridge over the southeastern U.S. Looks like it's going to be a warm winter in the southeast. As long as that subtropical high continues to dominate, we're going to need a big high amplitude trough that steamrolls across the southern U.S. like a bowling ball to really break down that ridge once and for all. Maybe it's going to be this. So I could see in the very long range, and we're out there at 300 hours. It's almost embarrassing to be looking this far in advance. But I do think that out near Thanksgiving, maybe a little after Thanksgiving, this is the bowling ball that we need right here to break down this subtropical ridge that's dominating the southeastern U.S. And if this high amplitude system can charge into this, this could signify the beginning of Dixie Alley season around November 23rd, 24th time period. Could get that ridge to break down, and we certainly could get a Dixie Alley tornado outbreak to close out the Category 6 season. So that's all I've got for the for this update here. Again, this thing's trying to shear out, but this should be enough of a potent system to bring in a pattern shift there around the end of November. And we've still got Eta out there spinning, a little bit of a convective burst on its eastern side. Maybe that could be a sign that it's trying to intensify as it's going to do this stall out and a U-turn off to the north. Definitely is a chance we could see a Category 1 hurricane. And now we've got these bands to deal with across southern Florida, the Florida Keys, leading to some coastal water rises, maybe some water spouts. Usually they don't happen this far removed from a tropical cyclone pass. But maybe if it does stall out down here, this could become kind of the effective northeastern quadrant of this system. But that's why tropical storm warnings are continuing out here in South Florida as these bands continue to come in, producing some gusty winds over the Florida Peninsula. Here's one over the Central Keys happening up there, mainly over the Everglades right now, the heaviest bands. And you can see there's some little ripples in this too because there is some stronger wind shear trying to create some inflow notches to this more healthy convection. Another one coming in right over downtown Miami right now, dominating out there. Flash flood warning out here across Miami up through the Fort Lauderdale areas. And that's as these bands continue to dump prolific rainfall rates. You got warm rain processes out here with these tropical soundings down in South Florida. And some extreme rainfall rates in these bands, especially over the Everglades there. But this one over downtown Miami is bringing some gusty winds and some heavy rainfall and leading to the prompting of this large flash flood warning throughout Miami, even though most of the rainfall looks like it's moving on, with the dry air at the mid-levels coming in, starting to erode this precipitation shield on the east side. Interestingly, I just lost power in here. Not sure why, so I'm going to have to take a look at that. But thank you guys for joining me. I think that was just my light going out, but it's possible that I just lost power in here. I definitely did. Thank you, everybody, for joining me today. I'm going to try to get this thing powered back up. Never stop chasing.